The corridor leading to the observation dome of the Stellar Ascendancy Academy buzzed with subdued tension. Students from 13 planetary systems walked in silence, their uniforms a spectrum of cultural design, feathers, scales, polyfiber suits, and shimmering robes. Yet they all shared one thing: the patch of the Advanced Galactic Problem-Solving Program sewn into their sleeves. Cadet Morgan Hale, the only human in the cohort, adjusted the neck clasp of his utility vest as he walked alongside a six-limbed Zaltari student who was muttering a last-minute prayer to a binary sun god. Morgan didn't share the reverence. He had been too busy reviewing the last few rotations of zero-G fieldwork and reading up on the peculiar logic games devised by Professor Chalek, whose lessons were rumored to have broken the minds of even the most gifted Nukran philosophers. Today was the final trial, the one that would decide who graduated with Strategic Command honors. And as with most things Chalek did, the test remained a secret until the very last moment. The door to the dome opened with a soft vacuum hiss, revealing a vast, spherical chamber with transparent walls. Through the dome, stars spun gently around the Academy's orbiting structure, and the rings of the nearby dead moon shimmered like fractured ice. In the center of the chamber hovered a translucent metallic sphere, about 2 meters in diameter. Floating around it were smaller cubes, magnetic crystals that pulsed faintly with light. There were 21 of them, suspended in a precise orbital dance. A hush fell over the group as Professor Chalek appeared from the far side of the chamber, floating as gracefully as ever despite her rigid exoskeletal structure. Her lower limbs curled beneath her, and her black glass eyes reflected the starlight. No words were spoken as a panel slid open in the wall and revealed the entry hatch to the anti-gravity zone. Professor Chalek rotated in the air and then, with the measured poise of someone who had witnessed centuries of student suffering, activated the central console with a tap of her claws. A projection burst into life behind her, displaying the schematic of the floating sphere and the orbiting crystals. She began to speak in intergalactic standard. This is the Unity Core, a structure designed to test coordination, logic, and spatial intelligence. Your task is simple: insert each crystal into the correct slot. However, the core reacts violently to misplacement. Touch the wrong alignment, and it resets. Attempt to stabilize yourself with propulsion, and you will be disqualified. You may not use outside tools. There is no gravity, no traction, no tether, only your body and your mind. Morgan exhaled through his nose. He had expected something like this. Chalek was obsessed with zero-G logic puzzles. But looking at the setup now, he realized this was worse than he imagined. The orbiting crystals moved erratically, like electrons refusing to follow any known pattern, and the sphere itself rotated slowly, as though mocking the idea of symmetry. One by one, the students began stepping into the chamber. Each of them passed through a brief decompression tunnel before being launched gently into the anti-gravity field. The moment they entered, their movements slowed, arms flailing slightly as their momentum carried them in whatever direction they last pushed off from. A Joran cadet tried to grab onto the edge of the puzzle sphere and immediately triggered a pulse of light that shot her backward. The crystals reset to a new orbit, and she slammed gently against the containment wall, growling in frustration. Morgan waited. He watched carefully. The key wasn't in speed. It was in understanding the movement, how your body worked when there was no friction, no weight, no down. He had practiced in simulators, yes, but not at this level, and yet something about it intrigued him. Most of the others were used to advanced exosuits and mental interfaces that aided with motion. Here, stripped of all augmentation, they looked awkward, powerless even. He adjusted the strap on his boot and tapped his fingers against his wrist in thought. The noise of grunts and muttered curses filled the comm system as student after student attempted the challenge and failed. Professor Chalek said nothing. She hovered above them like a dark wraith, recording everything with those obsidian lenses of hers. Morgan finally stepped forward when his name flashed on the entry panel. As he passed through the decompression tunnel, he took a deep breath and let the chamber pull him into the void. At first there was silence. Pure, cold silence. The kind that only existed in the space between planets. He floated forward, arms outstretched, gently rotating as the chamber absorbed all movement. His boots brushed against the surface of the entry ring, and then he was freeloading. The puzzle sphere hung ahead of him like a jewel, surrounded by orbiting challenges. He steadied himself, using only his breath. His training kicked in. No sudden movements. The moment he tried to reach for anything, he'd send himself spinning. He recalled a moment from his Earth training, watching archival footage of astronauts in the old ISS, how they would curl into themselves and push off gently with a fingertip, using walls and objects to redirect their course. But here, there was nothing to grab, nothing to use, just a human body in open air and a slowly shifting mechanical enigma before him. The first crystal orbited within a meter of his left side. He rotated slowly, trying to gauge its speed. He could hear the other students on the outer side of the dome, some cursing, others analyzing loudly over the comms, but he muted their feed. This had to be between him and the puzzle. No distractions. The sphere spun counterclockwise, but only slightly. Its openings looked like sockets, recesses designed to accept the crystal shapes. He studied one as it floated past. It had 3 ridges, just like the triangular crystal currently bobbing ahead of him. He twisted his body gently, using the air displacement from his breath to turn sideways. He wasn't going to reach for it, not yet. He needed to understand how the puzzle moved first. One mistake, and everything would reset. He'd watched that happen to 4 students already. The voice of Chelek echoed faintly through the chamber, addressing no one in particular. The laws of motion are universal, yet mastery of them is rare. Let us see if your minds can adapt when your bodies betray you. Morgan smiled faintly. She might as well have been speaking to him directly. His thoughts flicked to Earth again, to ice skaters spinning, to divers controlling their bodies mid-air, to astronauts moving with deliberate intention in orbit. Zero gravity wasn't just about floating. It was about understanding inertia. Once you moved, you didn't stop unless you acted. It was about making peace with the absence of ground beneath your feet. The crystal moved past him again. He didn't chase it. Instead, he waited until it made a full loop, this time calculating the time it took. 13 seconds. Good. Predictable. Now all he needed was to figure out how to intersect with it. Without throwing himself into uncontrollable spin, he exhaled, and with the softest movement of his hand against his thigh, nudged himself backwards. The rotation began, slow, almost lazy, but enough. His legs curled, his arms aligned, and he allowed the spin to carry him, mentally aligning with the puzzle's rhythm. In that moment, Morgan stopped thinking like a student or a human. He became a part of the motion. And as the next crystal approached, he prepared to meet it, not head-on, but alongside, like 2 stars in orbit about to kiss at perihelion. The rhythmic spin of Morgan's body slowed as his internal timing faded. The sharp metallic scent of filtered oxygen in the chamber felt heavier, though the artificial atmosphere remained technically unchanged. Around him, the environment pulsed with quiet tension. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was full of unspoken fear, a vacuum loaded with suppressed urgency. What had started as controlled concentration among the students was unraveling, thread by thread, into disarray. He could feel it, not just hear it through the open comms, but see it in the unfocused motion of limbs, the twitch of impatient claws, the anxious flapping of wings against weightlessness. One cadet spun sideways, completely off max, his legs flailing as he tried to realign. Another had drifted too close to the puzzle core, reaching too early for a crystal, and had set off a reset pulse that sent the entire grid spinning into a new configuration. The floating pieces jolted outward like shrapnel in slow motion, drifting for a moment before resuming their altered orbits. Several students shouted, their frustration echoing through the internal audio channel. Morgan muted the feed. His own breath echoed in his helmet, calm but deep. The new layout of the puzzle was more aggressive. The rotation of the sphere had increased slightly, and the crystals now moved in unpredictable intervals, some in erratic zigzags, others pulsing in and out of view as if reacting to unseen fields. It was a defense. The puzzle had recognized interference and activated a reactive pattern to disrupt the rhythm of would-be solvers. Morgan didn't move. He observed. Above him, a Zelkarian cadet, her 4 primary limbs extended outward for stability, was trying to maneuver herself back toward the edge of the field after a failed attempt. Her gestures were too sharp, too desperate. She couldn't gain control. With every motion, she twisted further out of alignment. Her trailing leg hit a support ring near the chamber's ceiling and triggered a low-frequency chime, an indirect warning. She covered her face in shame and drifted back, curling into herself. Another cadet, one from the Obari system, with translucent skin and vestigial wings, attempted a fast pivot to intercept a drifting hexagonal crystal. He managed to touch it, barely, but it slipped past his fingers and collided with the outer hull of the puzzle. The system emitted a sharp red pulse, the crystal turned black and dropped out of orbit. Disqualified. The cadet snarled something in his native tongue before launching himself in a broad, angry arc toward the wall. The professor said nothing. Morgan continued floating in place. He had moved very little since the trial began, choosing stillness over action. From this vantage, he could see everything, not just the puzzle, but the way it affected everyone around him. Students from elite systems, those genetically engineered or enhanced by thousands of years of planetary development, were collapsing under the pressure. Their bodies knew the motions, but their minds betrayed them with impatience. They had trained for execution, not improvisation. His muscles remained relaxed. No sudden impulses coursed through his limbs. No desire to reach, to prove, to show anything. Instead, he let his eyes follow the orbital patterns, mapping them again now that the puzzle had entered its new stage. There was a rhythm, even in chaos. The tighter the system became, the more obvious the underlying laws that governed it. No structure could sustain erratic motion for long. It would eventually seek harmony, even if it disguised it behind disarray. A narrow-bodied cadet from Noranive attempted a new tactic, using rotational inertia to spiral toward the core, trying to intersect a path at maximum speed. It almost worked. She collided with a floating cube just as it passed the center line, but her impact angle was too steep. The crystal shot off course and grazed the edge of the sphere. The lights flashed orange. Not a full reset, but a penalty. She was pushed back by a reactive pulse and had to retreat. The shock had twisted her orientation, and she drifted upside down, trying to hide her frustration. No one was speaking anymore. Even the most vocal cadets had fallen into mute despair. It was clearer with every failure that the rules weren't written in technical manuals. The students had come prepared for algorithms, for pre-programmed trajectories, for mechanical reactions. But this test, this trial, was closer to art than logic. It was a dance in zero gravity with an unpredictable partner. One mistake, and the rhythm was broken. Morgan turned his body gradually, orienting his feet downward, though there was no floor. He allowed a subtle rotation to take him halfway around the puzzle field, changing his position without the need for propulsion. His core stayed relaxed. Every shift of his limbs was measured, not by force, but by balance. If he was to begin, he needed to find the place where motion met intention, not where movement fought design. Near the lower edge of the sphere, two cadets floated side by side, whispering to one another over a private comm line. He didn't need to hear their words to understand what they were planning. One moved toward the right flank of the puzzle, trying to draw a crystal closer to his body, while the other positioned herself near a rotating socket, ready to catch it if the first cadet succeeded in redirecting it. The puzzle responded immediately. The crystal blinked twice and began to vibrate. Before either cadet could react, it shot upward at an unnatural angle and triggered a field distortion. The entire sphere flashed white. All orbiting pieces halted, reversed direction, and resumed their orbits with increased acceleration. The cadet near the socket was flung sideways, hitting the containment wall shoulder first. Her body curled in shock and she bounced gently away, stunned but not injured. Morgan adjusted his rotation to stay in position. His analysis was complete now. Each attempt to force the puzzle into compliance made the system more hostile. It rewarded observation, punished interference. It was not a test of dominance. It was an invitation to coexist with motion, to find a path through resonance instead of force. As he prepared to begin, he caught a glimpse of Professor Chalik hovering near the observation window. She hadn't moved in several minutes, but now her head tilted slightly. Her black lens eyes narrowed on him. She had noticed. She saw that he had not failed. More importantly, she saw that he had not tried. He closed his eyes once. His chest rose with a slow breath. His body turned sideways again, re-entering his previous spin. This time he increased the pace, not enough to rush, but enough to align himself with the newly accelerated orbit of the crystals. It wasn't about solving yet, it was about reacquainting himself with the new rhythm. The shift had changed the tempo, The melody was different now, faster, sharper. As he rotated, he opened his eyes at intervals, watching the path of a triangular crystal that now circled in a figure-8 pattern. The pattern, though more complex, still adhered to a measurable loop. It passed within arm's reach every 21 seconds. The opening to its target socket appeared precisely 8 seconds after its lowest descent. That gave him 13 seconds to prepare once it came into view. He filed that away. He watched another crystal, circular and slow, but pulsating every 9 seconds. It rotated vertically, unlike the others, which moved in horizontal or tilted planes. That one would be useful later. For now, it was too far out of phase. He continued to rotate. Beneath his calm surface, his mind was already mapping new orbits, calculating speeds, testing guesses. But he didn't act, not yet. Let the others struggle, he thought. Let the system reveal its secrets to those who listen, not to those who force. Above him, the puzzle spun faster. Around him, silence reigned, not empty but loaded with tension. Morgan was ready to begin. But first he would wait. Morgan opened his eyes again and realigned his body, rotating his torso ever so slightly to correct his drift. The silence of the chamber was no longer unsettling, it had become part of his concentration. Without friction or gravity, every breath mattered, every muscle tensed or relaxed with intention. He ignored the scattered cadets at the perimeter, their movements now wild with desperation. Some tried to communicate across the comms in whispered strategies, while others spun slowly, defeated or disqualified, waiting to be ejected from the chamber. Morgan wasn't going to speak. He didn't need permission to listen to his instincts. The puzzle sphere had settled into a new axis, leaning approximately 30 degrees from its original orientation. The motion of the crystals had become chaotic but not meaningless. He watched two of them brush past each other, then diverge in perfect opposition. That told him everything he needed. An invisible center still governed their flow. He turned his attention inward, letting go of expectation, letting his body react instead of plan. He pulled his knees inward and brought his arms close to his sides. Holding his breath, he extended his right hand slightly and gave a gentle push against the edge of his boot. The motion was minimal, but enough to set him spinning slowly in place. Not tumbling, spinning. His body became a symmetrical unit, orbiting its own invisible pole, maintaining orientation by the smallest of corrections. He imagined a skater on ice back home, turning with hands tucked in tight, gaining speed. But here, without a surface, his spin remained constant. One of the triangular crystals approached on its new path, floating silently just below his shoulder level. He rotated into alignment with it, using the spin of his own body like a dial. He waited, adjusting his angle by tensing his thighs. A slight twitch corrected his arc. The crystal floated closer, closer. He extended a single finger, not to grab, but to nudge. A tap, no more forceful than a leaf falling on water. The crystal changed direction slightly, just enough to match the edge of the spinning sphere. He didn't chase it, he anticipated it. Let it come to him. As the rotation of the sphere revealed one of the triangular sockets, he aligned himself through his spin and extended the crystal with his palm. The soft hum of the lock engaged. The crystal clicked into place, and the sphere gave off a quiet chime. One down. Morgan didn't react. No celebration, no movement. He allowed the success to pass through him like a breath. He continued to spin, now at a new angle, adjusting to the change in momentum caused by the light pressure of his arm. The next crystal was hexagonal and moved in a faster orbit, weaving between two others like a thread through a loom. He began timing it, watching how often it passed near the equatorial region of the puzzle, every 11 seconds. He had to shift his rotation, but just barely. He let himself drift upward by extending his knees and curling his arms in tighter. There was something elegant in the motion now. As he turned, his body formed a rhythmic pattern like a slow ballet. He was the only one in motion who wasn't resisting the chamber. He was part of it. Outside the core, Professor Cholek made a quiet note on her device. She didn't speak, but her gaze remained fixed on him now, studying, observing. Her outer mandibles twitched slightly, a rare show of interest. Around her, the other instructors stood frozen. They had seen thousands of students fail these trials. Few had ever adapted without tools. None had danced with the puzzle the way he was beginning to. He continued spinning, recalibrating his body as the crystal's orbit came into range. He made no sudden gestures, just a controlled extension of his leg and a barely there twist of his spine. That was all it took. The hexagonal crystal nudged toward him. He brought his hand forward, forming a pocket between his thumb and index finger, catching it gently. It didn't stop, it glided with him. As he rotated, he brought it into perfect alignment with the upper socket of the sphere. Another soft chime echoed through the dome. There was no sound in his comms channel now. The others had gone quiet. Whether out of awe or bitterness, he didn't care. He wasn't here to compete with them. He was here to complete the puzzle. The third crystal was rectangular and slower than the others. He suspected it was a decoy at first. It followed no pattern and often looped too far from the sphere to be of use. But as he observed it, he saw its subtle change in direction. It was responding to something. Likely magnetic pull. The sphere was drawing it in every fourth orbit, pulling it closer just long enough to be grasped. He exhaled and prepared. He didn't spin this time. He adjusted his pitch by extending one arm and retracting the opposite leg. He waited, body curled into a compact shape, and then released, slow, controlled, a glide. His trajectory intersected with the crystals at the halfway point. He timed it perfectly. His index finger brushed the crystal's edge and guided it into a new arc. He twisted once in midair and caught it with the back of his hand, closing his fingers around it like a whisper. The puzzle sphere opened a rectangular socket along its lower third. He drifted downward, rotating once to keep his orientation stable, and inserted the piece with a quiet, assured press. 3. Professor Chelik's secondary assistant, an Andari technician with deep green skin and a silver neural net around his temples, leaned closer to her and whispered, "He's not using any propulsion." She did not answer. She did not need to. The fourth crystal was already approaching. Smaller, denser, pulsating with internal energy. He suspected it was unstable, possibly a test of finesse. If handled too forcefully, it might trigger a reset or penalty. He changed nothing in his approach. He continued his slow drift, observing its trajectory. This one orbited vertically, unlike the others. It was a wild card. He stopped his own motion completely, drawing his limbs in until he hovered still like a sleeping satellite. He waited until the crystal's arc intersected with his level, then tilted his chest slightly and used his breath to rotate slowly into position. As it passed within range, he opened his hand and let it slide across his palm without resistance. It did not react. Good. He curled his fingers inward and lifted it, holding it gently. The sphere opened a small vertical port near its center. He didn't need to correct course. He was already aligned. The crystal slid in without resistance. The lights on the sphere pulsed green once, then returned to neutral. Only 17 to go, but now the sphere began to change. The rotation reversed. The orbits of the crystals began to tighten. The difficulty had increased. He was ahead of the algorithm's expected pace. He had triggered its adaptive defense mechanism. He didn't panic. He narrowed his eyes and began adjusting his core posture. The faster the sphere moved, the more delicate his responses had to be. No more long glides or lazy arcs. He would need to become more precise. Faster in calculation, slower in movement. He inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and let the rotation of the chamber whisper its rhythm into his bones. Then, with a barely noticeable pulse from his heel, he entered his next rotation. The dance was only beginning. The chamber had become a storm of controlled chaos. The sphere no longer moved with elegant symmetry. It rotated erratically, unpredictably, as if testing not only memory or logic, but resilience under pressure. Crystals zipped in tighter orbits now, no longer floating but darting with precision-engineered speed. A mistake here would no longer merely reset the pattern. It would eject the cadet entirely. Morgan understood this without hearing a single word from the professor. The system had adapted to him, and now he had to adapt in return. He reduced his spin, letting the inertia slowly bleed off by subtle adjustments to his arms and knees. Then he entered a new kind of motion, pulsed, rhythmic bursts of torque driven by isolated muscle control. He no longer spun in wide arcs. He twisted in tightly measured rotations, maintaining balance with nothing but his internal awareness of space. The orientation of the puzzle had shifted again. Two new sockets had revealed themselves on opposite sides of the sphere. Each required crystals that orbited on different planes. neither of which intersected with his current path. He would need to change elevation. He reached behind his back and pushed gently against the chamber's air displacement boundary, just enough to propel himself upward into the top third of the spherical zone. He rolled once to regain axis control and extended a hand, rotating slightly so his spine aligned with the new orbital path of a pentagonal crystal. It was moving fast, weaving between the others in tight loops. He had no intention of intercepting it directly. That would result in overcorrection, or worse, acceleration into one of the locked crystals that could trigger a total reset. He needed it to come to him. His breath slowed. His heart steadied. He closed his eyes for a single rotation, then opened them with full awareness. The pentagonal crystal was 22 seconds from intersection. He curved his body into a partial crescent and nudged himself downward, then let his torso unfold as if in free fall. The crystal, perfectly on time, skimmed the edge of his shoulder and bounced lightly toward the upper socket. He reached out with a cupped palm and caught it mid-glide. The socket accepted the piece with a soft electric buzz. The puzzle emitted a yellow pulse, a warning, not a failure. The crystal had entered at the correct time, but not with full stability. That meant the precision margin was shrinking. The puzzle was becoming stricter. There would be no forgiveness for even a partial misalignment from this point forward. Morgan didn't react. He began recalculating the rotational offset by watching the next two crystals accelerate. One was irregular, shaped like a jagged star with embedded micropoints that pulsed faint light every 3 seconds. It was likely fragile or volatile. The second was spherical, smooth, deceptively ordinary, yet orbiting in a figure-8 pattern, which meant it passed close to the core only once every full revolution. It would be more efficient to target the fragile one first. He pulled himself into a compressed spin, coiling his legs under his torso and letting his arms wrap around his knees. The change in surface tension helped reduce his rotation rate. Then he pulsed once from his right shoulder blade, causing a soft spin to begin. As he rotated, he visualized the jagged star piece and anticipated its next intersection. He needed to avoid touching the points if this puzzle mimicked gravitational compression logic. Even a touch on the wrong edge might destabilize the piece. The moment came quickly. He extended his forearm flat, creating a soft landing platform without grips, and allowed the piece to rest against his skin like a snowflake. It didn't spark. Good. Using the tension in his wrist, he gently spun the piece to face its correct angle. The socket opened beneath him, aligned perfectly. With a light tap from his knuckle, the piece slid into place. This time the pulse was green, clean insertion. Morgan let himself exhale. His shoulders floated back slightly, the motion enough to rotate his chest toward the next path. He could see the spherical crystal now, looping in from the far right. The figure-8 motion meant it would cross his line of sight only once every 45 seconds. That gave him time. He turned upside down and waited, the chamber's artificial starlight spinning around him in slow blinks. As he floated in stillness, his eyes caught a reflection off the inside of the observation dome. Professor Chelik was no longer standing. She had moved forward, closer to the dome's inner glass, her clawed arms folded. Behind her, the assistant was speaking rapidly into a control pad. A third instructor, one from the Aquatic Systems Division, stared at the feed with both brows raised high. It was clear something unexpected was happening, and it had everything to do with him. The spherical crystal arrived. Morgan let his legs uncoil and used the momentum to align his shoulders to the insertion plane. The path was narrow. The crystal wasn't just on a figure-8 orbit. It oscillated in speed based on gravitational interference from the sphere's core. That meant he couldn't predict its final velocity. He would have to mirror it, become part of its flow. He inhaled deeply and rolled sideways, letting his right arm glide into the crystal's orbit. The moment it brushed his elbow, he flexed inward and brought the piece under his forearm. The sudden deceleration from contact threw his hips sideways, but he corrected with a flex of both ankles and brought the crystal into his grip. As he spun around, he locked eyes with the target socket near the center of the puzzle. He thrust the crystal forward, not hard, not slow, just enough. Click. No pulse, just silence. That meant perfect integration. The system had accepted it without needing confirmation. Morgan blinked once. 5 more remained. The sphere shifted again. Its surface began to unfold in layers, revealing new sockets that hadn't been visible before. These were deeper, more recessed. That meant the crystals would need to be inserted at precise velocities and angles to reach the core. He pivoted backward and began to spin again, slowly accelerating. This time he was the orbit. The puzzle didn't know what to make of him anymore. It had been designed to challenge minds, not to accommodate instinct fused with rhythm. Morgan understood that now. This wasn't about solving, it was about synchronization. He was no longer the outsider. He was part of the equation. The next crystal came fast, diamond-shaped with a hollow center. He spun toward it, arms crossed, then extended in a whip-like motion that intercepted the path exactly as the crystal began to bank. It caught on the inside of his elbow. He twisted his wrist, rotated, and inserted it into the upper socket without breaking speed. The puzzle emitted 3 green pulses: acknowledgement, approval, invitation. The final sequence had begun. Morgan felt it in his spine. The puzzle was ready to yield. But not easily. The last 4 crystals began to orbit in perfect formation, each maintaining equidistant spacing and rotating at variable speeds. He would have to follow all 4 at once, map their paths, predict collisions, and act before any one of them altered course. He steadied his body and began a final spin, the slowest yet. This time he let gravity, or what passed for it here, do the work. His body aligned naturally with the puzzle's center axis. He allowed his vision to blur just enough to perceive the motion without focusing too hard. The first of the 4 approached. He reached. Caught. Inserted. 3 to go. The second passed below him. He inverted, let himself fall into its orbit, scooped it upward, pivoted mid-air, slid it in. 2. The third was high. He launched himself gently, catching its tail path, using the kinetic drag to rise and arc back down. It entered the socket sideways. He corrected with a tap of his thumb. The system hummed. The last crystal hovered at the farthest point. He let his momentum drift, extending arms and legs, matching its final approach. He didn't rush. He didn't stop. He waited. It came to him. He took it. The core opened. A sound, not in his ears but in his chest, resonated. A low harmonic hum, deep and ancient. The puzzle sphere ceased rotation. All lights dimmed, then burst into radiant white. Morgan floated still, and the chamber went silent. For a moment, time lost its edges. The glow from the core was neither harsh nor warm, but steady, expanding across the chamber like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. The puzzle sphere no longer spun. The crystal orbits dissolved into stillness. Every surface on the metallic orb pulled inward, folding and retreating until the central mass compressed into a compact, polished sphere no larger than a clenched fist. It floated serenely in front of Morgan, unmoving, as if waiting to be acknowledged. He reached out, hesitated for a beat, then wrapped his fingers around it. The metal was warm, not the artificial heat of a machine, but something more organic, as though the puzzle had absorbed the tension, the motion, the intent of every student who had ever touched it, and had now given something back. He pulled it toward his chest and let his arm fall to his side, the sphere still resting gently in his grip. A soft, mechanical click echoed through the chamber, followed by a sudden drop in pressure. The stars beyond the transparent dome flickered as artificial gravity reactivated. It began slowly, almost respectfully, letting each cadet drift down with control rather than force. Morgan felt the shift first in his shoulders, then in his legs as the pull returned. His body settled and his feet touched the padded floor of the chamber. He stood upright. No applause followed, no fanfare, just the gentle reawakening of systems. The dome lights stabilizing, the outer ring humming with re-engaged functions, and the decompression tunnel unlocking with a sharp hiss. Professor Chelik moved forward at last. She crossed the edge of the chamber, her multi-jointed limbs gliding without the exaggerated grace she usually performed for dramatic effect. Her posture was subdued, her long thorax slightly lowered in a gesture rarely seen in front of students. Morgan stood still, breathing slowly, one hand still closed around the sphere. She stopped 3 paces from him. "Cadet Hale," she said, her voice softer than usual but still layered with the rasp of her native dialect. "You have completed the Unity Core trial." He nodded once. He didn't know what to say, and the silence between them felt complete. There were no rules about what came next, no protocol for this outcome. Behind her, the observation room remained still, The instructors had stopped recording. The assistants no longer tapped at consoles. The other students remained at the edges of the chamber, some standing, some kneeling, others still trying to process what had just occurred. Chalek extended one limb and gestured toward the exit corridor. "Follow," he did. His steps were light. The weightlessness had left its echo in his muscles. He felt taller, not in stature, but in presence. The metal doors slid open for them without a word spoken into the system. As he passed through the threshold, the chamber behind him dimmed, returning to standby mode. It would remain inactive until the next cycle, but he suspected no one would challenge the puzzle again for a long while. They walked through a long, arched corridor made of polished obsidian alloy, the walls lined with fractal etchings from ancient civilizations. The academy often reminded students that its foundations were older than most of their species. Morgan had never paid attention to the inscriptions before, but now they seemed to pulse faintly with relevance. Not history, not prophecy. Something simpler, recognition. Chalek led him into a private chamber with a viewing platform overlooking the nearby gas giant. The room was silent except for the occasional electronic hum of the atmospheric filters. She turned to him and finally removed the translator node embedded in her clavicle, speaking in his native tongue with surprisingly clear articulation. "You have done what none of your kind or mine have done," she said. "The Unity core was not designed to be solved. It was designed to reveal." He blinked. Reveal what? Chalek's mandibles twitched into a form of restrained amusement. Character. Limit. Ego. The cadets who fail it usually blame design, speed, or others. The cadets who solve part of it boast. You, however, did neither. You aligned. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She stepped closer and looked down at the sphere still in his hand. "It is yours. It no longer belongs to the academy. It has bonded." "What do you mean, bonded?" "You synchronized with it. Fully. Without technology, without mental interfacing, without tools. It responded to you not as a student, but as a node of resonance. You are now part of its memory, and it is part of yours." He examined the object more closely. It pulsed faintly, and he realized that it now beat in rhythm with his heart. Chalek turned and motioned toward the view of the stars. "You will be remembered for this, not just in our records. The Council will hear of it. Your people will hear of it. The other systems will revise their perception of Earthborns. You've shifted something today." Morgan stared out at the dark expanse, the pale orange atmosphere of the gas giant churning with eternal storms. He didn't feel heroic. He didn't feel enlightened. He simply felt still. "Was this a test of intelligence?" he asked. "No," she said. "It was a test of truth. And yours, Cadet Hale, is pure motion, guided by stillness. That is rare." She left him there in the observation room. The sphere dimmed in his hand as if resting. He stood alone for several minutes, absorbing the quiet, then turned and walked back toward the cadet quarters. By the time he arrived, word had spread. No one spoke to him directly, but heads turned, eyes followed, some filled with curiosity, others with envy, a few with awe. He passed them without expression. He didn't need to explain. The chamber had done that for him. In the quiet of his room, he set the sphere on the desk. It rotated slightly, not from gravity or mechanics, but from memory. Its surface shimmered briefly, then stilled. That night he slept deeply for the first time in months. No dreams, no simulation echoes, just the silence of space and the echo of a puzzle that had finally found its solution. In the days that followed, the Academy administration offered him early honors, commendations, and entry into advanced fleet strategy councils. He accepted none of it right away. Instead, he spent his hours in motion, walking the corridors, observing the shifts of light through the artificial windows, and watching his peers navigate problems with renewed attention. Some asked questions. Some watched him from afar. One brave cadet from Eltari 4 approached him directly and asked, "What did you do differently?" He looked at her, thoughtful. "I didn't do anything differently," he said. "I just stopped trying to control it." She blinked. "That's it?" He nodded. "That's it." Eventually, he did accept his commendation. Not for status, but because it gave him access to older, more obscure parts of the Academy's archives, places where ancient puzzles slept, and forgotten systems waited for someone not to solve them, but to understand them, and the sphere remained with him always, never quite inert, never quite active. Like a mirror, it only responded when he did, a quiet companion pulsing gently with the rhythm of discovery. The Unity core had been completed, but what it unlocked was something far greater, the quiet power of human instinct in a galaxy that had forgotten stillness. And Morgan Hale, the cadet who spun through the stars, became the name by which that lesson would be remembered.